Hey guys, welcome to my review of Rosemary and Rue by Seanan McGuire, the first book in the October Daye series. So how we are going to handle these kind of reviews is going to be that I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to talk first about the book itself and give my non-spoilery kind of thoughts and review it that way. Then we're going to talk about spoilers for the book so that anybody who wants to peace out at that point can. And then we're going to talk about spoilers for the rest of this series and how this fits into the rest of the series. So again, if you don't want to be spoiled for the rest of the series, at that point you can go ahead and click away from this video. The October Daye series is an urban fantasy series, like I said, by Seanan McGuire. And it follows our main character of October Daye, who is half fae, half human. She is a knight errant for a local fae kingdom, and she had a pretty traumatic experience where she was turned into a fish and left for 14 years. I think I've been saying 11, but it was 14 years. And nobody knew where she was until she finally broke free of her curse and come out of it, only to realize everything she knew is gone. And so at that point, she just said, I am out. I don't need to be part of fairy anymore. And that's where we kind of open on it. And of course, so the main plot is just that one of the people who Toby considers friend, mentor, that kind of thing, has been killed, and with her dying breaths calls Toby and curses her over the phone into finding her murderer. And if Toby does not succeed in finding the murderer in a reasonable amount of time according to this curse will kill Toby. Because that's a great way to treat your friends, right? Anyway, so that's the basic premise. So let's get into my non-spoilery feelings about this particular book. It was a trip, you guys. So for anybody that doesn't know, this is a huge reread. And I have point blank forgotten. I knew some of it was going to be bad. I didn't remember which parts were as bad as they were. So my feelings on it are a little bit mixed. But let's go ahead and jump into world building and talk about that. The world building was pretty well done. I thought it was a really nice balance of giving us things to explaining what was happening, but also giving us interesting information about this world that is useful now, but probably more useful later. But then leaving some things that are just mystery. And like every book kind of does that, that's in a series. A lot of books do that. But I think that Seanan McGuire found a really nice balance for this one. That being said, a lot of the information that we got for the world building was done through really clunky info dumps. The entire second chapter is Toby talking about her Changelings Choice. Essentially, when she was a child, she was forced to make a choice whether she was going to be part of the Fae world or whether she was going to be part of the human world. And it's a choice that's given at like anywhere from 3 years old to like 18. It just depends on each kid. And it was all about this choice and how, like, what it was like. And it was essentially a flashback. And it was so clunky. It was just not well done. It was good information to have, especially about Toby and character building and all. And then, like, now looking back on it, and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of clues given here too about other things later in the book. But at the same time, like, it's hard to read it because it just doesn't flow as well as I wanted it to. And those kinds of info dumps are obviously more frequent in the beginning. They're a little bit longer in the beginning, but they keep cropping up throughout the whole book, and it's just so hard to read it because it is really good information to have. It's just not very well executed. Like, it's just not. Having said that, and obviously from a different point of view where I have read all the books that are currently out in this series, I understand what she was doing. And that is, this book really serves as an introduction into this world and a setup to start laying the foundation of this world. The world building gets really in depth, really intense, and this is just the bare minimum of it. And so I get it. And at the same time, it was a little hard to read, but I was able to power through it because like I knew it was in service of getting us to this really incredible world building that she's going to be like building on, right? So it's a little bit, again, mixed feelings, right? As for the characters and their development, we don't actually know a ton of people. We find out a lot about Toby. Obviously, she's our main character. We do find out a lot about Devin, and everybody else is kind of in this secondary, tertiary kind of character situation. And we do find out some about each one of them, but not a ton. And because there was just so many characters, right? And this actually, in some ways, this really makes sense because this is how real life is, right? Like she shunned this whole world and now she's going back to this world, and there's a lot of people in this world that know her, and so it would make sense to her. But in a sense of like, this is a story and you need to bring your readers along, it was just kind of a few too many characters from my perspective, at least. Now, Toby, like I said, so there wasn't a ton of character development. However, I will say, number one, that I never really felt like the characters were kind of cardboard cutouts, but I don't know if that's because I know that a lot of them from later in this series, right? And they are very consistent throughout their books. So I was just like, oh yeah, of course that's how they are when she first meets them or first runs into them or whatever. So I'm not the best judge of this, to be fair. But at the very least, you do know that these characters do remain consistent and well-rounded eventually. The thing that I did find that it really did help knowing that Toby is depressed, because all her decisions, all her terrible decisions that she makes, and being down on herself as much as she is, made so much more sense with that context. And so like, I didn't suddenly love Toby as a character from this first book. Like, I remember when I first read it, I did not love this character, and I still don't love this version of Toby in these first couple books, but I understand her a lot better, and I think that that's a really important key. So just go in knowing she is depressed. She's really down on herself. She makes the occasional really bad decision because of it. Like, it's consistent with a depressed person. The thing that I do love about Toby, though, is that once she has given her word, she will go. She's gonna keep that word, and she explains it as the fact that she's a changeling. The purebloods look down on her, and they really expect all changelings to kind of be these awful people who are liars and thieves and blah, blah, terrible people. And she said, I keep my word because as soon as I don't, I'm just fulfilling all their thoughts about what I really am. And so she makes certain that if she says she's going to do something, she's going to do it. So like, even without the curse, you get the feeling that she would absolutely find out who this murderer is because she said she would. So I really do like that, because you don't always get a lot of those kinds of characters. And so let's jump into the writing style and writing structure. It's rough. Occasionally you get sentences that you can see Seanan McGuire where she's going to go in the future, but for now it kind of just lacks that appeal, that luster that she has from later books in this series and like the Wayward Children series and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's bad, however. It's just typical. And if you've read other Seanan McGuire books, you'll know that that's not what she generally does. So it's a bit of a negative surprise going in. But it isn't bad writing. It's just very typical writing. And then, of course, we do have stylistically that whole, it's a clunky plot, it's a clunky formatting and how she does her info dumping and all this kind of stuff. It's not great. very much a first-time author kind of feel. And then lastly, let's talk a little bit about the plot itself. It's pretty standard urban fantasy, to be perfectly honest. It has, as I was reading this, I was just like, you know what? I think I have read books like this before. Now, of course, when it first came out, there wasn't really anything like this. So it was the first of its kind. However, since then, I have read it. So if you're coming into this later, it's going to feel very, very standard. And like, I get it. I mean, the plotting was fine. The pacing was fine. It wasn't, I actually thought the pacing was better than fine. It was pretty good. But the plot itself it didn't really draw me in. I didn't love it. It's just very standard urban fantasy. But the last point I'm going to be making for this non-spoilery section is that the one thing that I think that it does really, really well, that you only get if you stick with the story, is that a lot of urban fantasies have this kind of thing. In the very first book, they do a lot of setup and they have a lot of promise and potential. And then almost every single urban fantasy series like just doesn't live up to it. You're always left slightly disappointed in some way. And this one is the first series where I have felt like it truly delivers on its potential, on its promises. It has amazing world building. These characters truly develop over the books and become different people. Like, the plots get better and the plot lines get really intricate, and things that are in this book become important later. I recognize things that were important for book 3, book 4, book 8, book 12. Like, it was bananas to me how much was laid down in this first book, even knowing she didn't know how many books she was going to be allowed to write in this series, and she still did it anyway. So it fulfills that promise in a way that a lot of urban fantasies really just don't. So that's it for my non-spoilery section. I know that I'm like fairly negative. It's much more negative than I would have liked. However, I do think it's worth it if you stick with it. Although I do understand if you give it a shot and you just say, no, this is not for me. I get it. However, I do encourage you to at least give it a shot. So that's it. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the spoilery section for this book. So if you do not want to be spoiled, this is the time to leave. Okay. So now that hopefully everybody has left who does not want to be spoiled, the only thing that I had to say that's spoilery only for this book is, oh my gosh, I hate Devin so much. I forgot how much I hate Devin. And then I got to page like 50 and I realized that this Devin was in the story, like how much he was in the story. And I was just like, I hate Devin. And then it was really hard to read, especially with everything else going on. But I hate Devin. And part of it's just because he's a really bad person. I hate how he's treated Toby. I hate how he's treated these kids. I just kind of hate this character. But additionally, like, I like Toby enough that I was just like, he's so bad for you. Walk away. And oh my gosh, I hate Devin. I was definitely cheering when he died, right? Like, I was like, awesome. I'm going to cry a little bit because Dare died, but I am definitely cheering because Devin died. And then the only other thing was just that I found it really interesting, this reread, knowing that Devin is our villain. When Toby starts talking about Evening's death and her investigation, he kind of perks up and is like, so how's that going? And you're like, you've got a vested interest in that. Of course you do. So it was a little bit interesting coming back around to it this time. That's all I've got for the spoilery section for this book. I am going to now be spoilery for the series. So if that's not of interest to you, you should go ahead and click away. Okay. So hopefully everybody who does not want to be spoiled for this series has already left. And so let's go ahead and jump into it. I had a couple really big, interesting things, enough that I actually wrote down notes, and I am not the type of person that generally takes notes on any book ever whatsoever. So that chapter, that terrible backstory chapter about the Changelings Choice, was actually really interesting to read from the perspective of knowing that Amandine, Toby's mom, was changing her blood to make her more human, and then Toby ended up choosing Faye, the fairy, and how like upset Amy was, and just watching that whole thing go down, and Sylvester knowing it and saying I'm sorry. Oh, it was just like, well, now that's interesting. And I kind of actually, I know we get a lot of this kind of relationship as the series goes on, but I don't know if we ever go back to the Changelings Choice and all the stuff that it meant, but I hope we do. And then, like, I was so interested in watching all this stuff with Evening, because Evening's a firstborn, right? Like, she can't be killed using just iron. Toby wrote her death, and Evening was killed with iron. But Evening cannot be killed with just iron because she's firstborn, which we learn in the third book when Toby has to go and kill Blind Michael, right? You have to kill him with iron and silver. And so, like, Evening wasn't killed with iron and silver, just iron. So she's not really dead, which makes it so much more interesting and makes sense when she pops up later. And you're like, resurrection trope? And it's like, no, because like the clues for why she would live are there in the previous books. Anyway, but then of course I'm just like, first of all, does nobody know or care that Evening's the firstborn? Like, everybody's just like, oh, she's been around a really long time and her illusions are like the best I have ever seen. And I'm just like, at that point, wouldn't you be like, hey, she might be a firstborn? Like, that's one thing that I do think is inconsistent. But one thing I do think is interesting is I wonder if Evening let Devin kill her because she knew he was coming, and she knew that he probably wouldn't kill her using a method that would actually kill her. And so it allowed her to be dead and go about her business as she wants to do. I really wonder if that was like actually a plan. I want to know, and I really hope we get more information about it. And then, of course, like, I'm like, we're talking about her sister, Dawn, and I'm like, is Dawn another firstborn? Or is Dawn, like, a niece or a grandchild or something? I'm very interested in that, too. But I don't think we've ever had the Dawn question answered. And then, of course, when we meet Luna, who is Kitsune, of course, Toby's notating all these characteristics about Luna that's not, consistent with her being a Kitsune. And I'm like, of course, because she's not. Like, she's just wearing it like a skin suit. And I was just like yelling at Toby, being like, really? No, it's not characteristics, but you live in a world where there's a bunch of magic, so maybe she's not actually what you think she is. Anyway. And then lastly, it was so interesting this time around reading it and meeting all these when you first read this book, you're like, oh, all these like little side characters that she has to meet, whatever. And then this time it's just like, oh, and he's gonna become your squire and basically your kid, and that's gonna become he's gonna become your fiance, and of course like Danny and Lushak, and like finding out that Lushak is like her auntie, and like and then coming back and reading how scared she is of the Sea Witch is just phenomenal. Oh, I just like, I am so in awe of how well Seanan McGuire did this, because like she introduced, except for May, she introduced basically everybody who becomes Toby's family. May and Raj. But like, they're going to be coming up really soon. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And just seeing all the reaction, Tybalt's reaction. I truly believe that the first time we meet Tybalt really does not like Toby. And then the second time they meet, she did something, asking him to take the hope chest, he's just like, just finds this so intriguing, that he's like, maybe I need to rethink my opinion of her. And you're like, yes, you do. Just you wait, buddy boy. Like, oh, it's so good. It's so good. And this is why I didn't hate reading this book. It was not great for so many reasons, but it was so good reading it from this perspective of this is where it all started. So anyway, you guys, that's what I've got. I don't know when I'm going to be starting book 2, which is a local habitation. That's probably going to be later this month, either late this month or early February. But we'll see how that goes. If you guys are reading along with me, please let me know. Obviously, if you've stayed to the end, you've read the whole series, so please come talk to me down in the comments about it. Are you rereading this? Did you find the same things? Did you find other things? Please let me know. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.